Welcome to the newest episode of Beatin' and Bangin'. I'm your host, Kyle Dalton. In today's episode, we've got multiple items to discuss, but I'm really going to zero in on one specific topic, and that is Prime's coverage and the reaction that has come from it since Sunday's race, including Fox's response to what they saw and what fans had to say. Because if you've paid attention to social media, there have been nothing but rave reviews about the streaming service's coverage. Plus, I'll have the comments from Dale Earnhardt Jr. yesterday on his podcast and his role in the broadcast and what he likes specifically about it and how it's better than what Fox has been doing. In addition, Larry McReynolds was on the Door Bumper Clear podcast and spoke about the same topic and said some things that I don't think fans will want to hear. And we'll wrap up today's episode with our By the Numbers segment, where we'll do our last 5 races analysis, our race progression charts, and a new feature from my buddy Joel Steuben called Surging and Sliding that shows the biggest movers on the day. However, before we start doing all the number crunching and talking about Prime's coverage, there was another news item that I wanted to talk about from yesterday when NASCAR Senior Vice President of Competition Elton Sawyer appeared on SiriusXM NASCAR Radio. He was on the channel and doing his regular recap of the weekend at Charlotte, and unexpectedly brought up the word horsepower. Well, to Mike Bagley's credit, he followed up on Sawyer's comment a short time later and asked him what the status is currently of the horsepower conversation at NASCAR.
Yeah, I think, Mike, just it's on the table. You know, we are working closely with all the stakeholders in the industry, and as I said, the collaboration has been better than ever in our sport on all topics. And this particular one had a team owner council meeting last week, came up, we discussed that, working closely. I know John Probst has had a conversation with our engine builders to see what we could do and how that would look and what changes would need to be made. You know, as we talked about before, you know, there's the efficiencies that come with our rules and regulations that we have today. And if you look at engines and sealed engines, and there's a lot that goes into it, and it's a tall mountain to climb, but we're willing to do that and give our race fans the best product. So again, behind the scenes right now, there's a lot of conversation going on. How can we do that? Where do we do it? Is it, is it across the board? Obviously, that's not going to be super speedways. It's just a lot to digest. But what I will say is it is on the forefront. It is on the table, and something that we're discussing, daily.
He mentioned how the topic was brought up at the Team Owner Council meeting last week. Just a reminder, that council is made up of Brad Keselowski, Heather Gibbs at JGR, and Justin Marks at Trackhouse. So the fact that he said it was talked about last week is good. He mentions daily at the end of his comment. Does he really mean that? Is he just saying it? I'm not really sure, but it does seem to me that there's been a tonal shift. There's been a change in tone from where we're waiting for the next manufacturer, as they've said over and over in the past. It does appear now that NASCAR is somewhat open to adding horsepower. Now, the qualifier is that it is probably not going to be what we want it to be, like 900 or greater horsepower. Because, as I've talked about on the channel before, Doug Yates has said increasing horsepower from 670 where it is currently to 750 wouldn't be a big deal. Anything above that would be more expensive and cost prohibitive. So I just thought it was an interesting shift that NASCAR really does seem like it is potentially going to increase horsepower in the future. Now, whether it actually makes a difference is a whole other discussion. I don't know at this point, but I do think it is a step in the right direction. Moving on to the next story and the overall bigger theme for today's video, and that is what happened with Prime's coverage on Sunday night. As I saw from many of you in the comments in Monday's video, you absolutely loved it. Listen, I'm right along there with you. I thought it was absolutely great coverage from the start in the pre-race show to the race and the post-race show, which is something that we're going to talk about quite a bit in the next few minutes. But I want to go back to what was said on Monday in a post on X by Adam Stern of the Sports Business Journal. And it's a specific comment from Fox Sports President of Marketing, Robert Gottlieb, that says, quote, "Every season is different. The challenges and opportunities each year are different. We've just finished this week, so we have not yet begun to look back, evaluate, and kind of game plan for moving forward. So that's still to come. We'll have to figure out next year. I will say the performance, ratings, and racing we had, it was another great season. We're proud to be the flagship partner of NASCAR, and next year will be an even greater season. And of course, we'll do everything we can to let folks know how great NASCAR is as well." End quote. And then there's an additional quote from Gottlieb that says, "I wouldn't draw any conclusions from what we did this year to market NASCAR to what next year might look like." I interpreted those remarks as basically Fox saying, yeah, we saw Prime's broadcast on Sunday and realized we need to get it together because we are way behind when it comes to coverage. Whether that's from zoomed in camera angles, the broadcast showing one thing while the announcers talk about something completely different, or a whole host of other things that I have documented on this channel through the last couple of years, including simple mistakes in graphics like in Fox's last race of the season and the All-Star race, when with 50 laps to go on the scoring pylon, graphics showed Justin Allgaier's name instead of Kyle Larson. Fox has definitely dropped the ball when it comes to overall production quality. So that takes us to yesterday and the Door Bumper Clear podcast, where Larry McReynolds was the guest. They obviously talked about the race at Charlotte, how it was such a great race, and then toward the end of the episode, Freddie Kraft brought up Prime's coverage and said he didn't want to get into comparing Prime's coverage to Fox's coverage. But then Larry McReynolds weighed in and said this.
I watched the whole thing, and they did a phenomenal job. And already, as expected, I'm seeing people compare the Fox broadcast to the Prime. And to me, it's comparing apples to oranges. I'm sorry. I mean, I can't completely speak for Fox, but we're never going to have a broadcast where basically we do an hour pre-race, an hour post-race, and the majority of the commercials are side by side. We're network television. You're just comparing an apple. It's not even an apple to an orange. It's an apple to a banana. Yeah. I mean, what they did Sunday night was a phenomenal broadcast. I feel like for 25 years we've done great broadcasts. They're just never going to be the same. And if anybody expects it, you're probably going to be disappointed.
I have to disagree with Larry Mack. It's not comparing apples to oranges or apples to bananas, or apples to whatever fruit you want to use. Simply put, they are both the broadcast for NASCAR. They are what fans watch and the way people see the product and presentation of NASCAR. As I mentioned in Monday's video, one comment that I saw on social media summed it up best by saying, Prime presented NASCAR as a sport, while Fox presents NASCAR as the carnival in town for the weekend with fast hot rods. What's that old saying? Perception is reality. So Larry Mack, I feel, is kind of missing the mark when talking about Fox's great coverage, while I think the comments from the Fox Sports president of marketing seem to indicate that they're going to do everything they can to let folks know how great NASCAR is as well. They haven't been doing that for the last several years. They have not shown how great NASCAR is, and contrary to what Larry Mack's saying, it has nothing to do with side-by-side commercials. It has to do with the actual presentation and missed graphics and zoomed-in camera angles and all those things that I have repeated and beat the dead horse over for the last several years. Those are Fox's failings. So I listened to Larry Mack's comments and it kind of concerned me. But then I see the Fox executives' remarks and it kind of gives me hope that maybe, just maybe, Fox saw what happened on Sunday and they've seen the overwhelmingly positive response, and they will try to up their game next year. That is something that we can all hope happens. There was something else that Larry Mack said during his appearance on Door Bumper Clear, and I want you to take a listen to what it was.
I wish we had, if we've got a window, and I'm talking about when I say we, Fox and FS1, if we've got a window, I'd rather see us do more post-race than pre-race.
Absolutely.
We do a lot of pre-race. We do very little post-race. If we could just shift that, and I realize there's broadcast windows and times and all that, because that's what I enjoyed Sunday night was Justin Marks coming to that stage and talking to Danielle and those guys. Even William Byron, that finished second, being able to hear his emotions over dominating a race and finishing second, Ross Chastain, that's what intrigued me. So if I had one wish, if we have to stay in that window, let's do less pre-race and let's do more pre-race. More post-race.
In this case, I completely agree with America's crew chief. Most folks really don't care to see the pre-race stuff and what's going on before the race. 15, 20 minutes is plenty of time, and even Larry Mack went on to say, like the NFL, when it says that it's a 1:03 Eastern Time kickoff, you can expect the football in the air at 1:03. Whereas with NASCAR, it says the time, and that's when coverage starts, but the green flag doesn't actually wave for another half hour or longer. He said he's all for praying and the anthem and all that stuff that goes on before, but it doesn't need to be shown on the broadcast, and instead, they could go straight into the green flag when the broadcast starts. I completely agree with that. He also talked about more post-race, and that's something I think Prime proved on Sunday is the way to go. They had a solid pre-race show, but after the race was where I thought they did a bang-up job in lengthy interviews with Ross Chastain, William Byron, and Justin Marks. Well, Dale Earnhardt Jr. talked about that subject on his podcast yesterday on the Dale Jr. Download.
So the pre-race was great. The post-race was even better. I got a lot of comments on the post-race.
So good.
People are so thankful just to have a post-race. The other luxury of streaming is our post-race is fluid.
Yeah.
It might, if we feel like we've got everything done and everything that we could possibly share in 30 minutes, that's when it'll end. If it needs to go longer, it'll go longer. We don't have an out. And if there was just so much going on that we need to be on there for an hour and a half, they will.
Having a post-race that can last for as long as they want, now that's where Larry Mack is right that the two broadcasts are different. But there's something else that Junior mentioned on his podcast that he likes about the Prime post-race, and that is it's also freewheeling and can include F-bombs, which it did, or drinking beer, which it did. Just an overall fun vibe, which reminds me of something funny that happened in the post-race show that I completely forgot to mention in Monday's video. Check it out.
So essentially locked into the playoffs, winning the Great American Race earlier this season.
Did you see that? William Byron totally left Carl Edwards hanging. It was a funny moment, but you could tell in the interview how much Willie B admired Carl. Despite that awkward beginning, it was a really cool exchange between the pair. That doesn't happen on Fox's coverage because Byron is not going to sit down in a post-race interview with anyone to talk. He's standing there on pit road, gives his 45-second interview, and he's done. So that was an interesting exchange, and I think it just goes to show that Prime's post-race show raises the bar when it comes to post-race shows, and it's something that we can all look forward to in the next 4 races. There was one other thing that I wanted to mention from Dale Earnhardt's download that I thought was funny, based on what is coming up with the in-season tournament. Take a listen.
We decide the 32 drivers that will be in the in-season bracket, and they may downplay that. I wouldn't let, and you're talking to the drivers all the time, I would not let them get away with it.
No.
They're full of if they don't think that they want to accidentally win $1 million.
They're thinking about it because a lot of the drivers have already said, "Oh no, really, it's not changing our focus."
Well, it won't change. It might not change exactly how they strategize to win races or approach the races, but they are thinking about it.
It's going to change how they race people, though.
They're lying if they're saying otherwise, because every one of them would love to pocket that money.
I, for one, am really pumped about this tournament. I think it will bring an added element of excitement, and as Junior said, despite what the drivers might say, they do care about it because it's an opportunity to win $1 million. And now it's time for our By the Numbers segment. And we'll start with our last 5 races analysis. And interestingly enough, despite his 37th place finish on Sunday, Kyle Larson is still the leader this week with a 9.0 average finishing position. What's really interesting about this is if you look at where he was last week, he was also at that same 9.0. But you can see he had a 37th place finish at Darlington. That's dropped off now, and he's replaced it with his 37th on Sunday at Charlotte in the Coca-Cola 600. Moving into number 2 this week, after being 4th last week, is Ross Chastain. He's actually tied for 2nd with William Byron and has 3 top 10s in his last 5, including his runner-up finish earlier this month at Texas. And our biggest mover of the week in our last 5 races is Chase Briscoe, who has moved into 4th. Last week, Briscoe was 10th with an average finishing position of 15.6. This week, he's 4th at 10.6 with an impressive 3 top 5s in his last 5. Chase Elliott moved up a spot from last week and is 5th. Christopher Bell is 6th, and the top 10 is rounded out by some surprise names, including Austin Dillon at 13.8, with his 3 top 10s still keeping him up near the top. Ricky Stenhouse Jr. is at 14.0 with his 3 top 15s. Austin Cindric is 9th, and Noah Gragson is 10th with a pair of top 10s in his last 5. And as I do each week, I like to focus on a couple of the bigger names who've struggled. And when looking at the bottom, Brad Keselowski has been at the bottom throughout the season. Last week, he had an average finishing position of 30 and was 2nd to last. With his 5th place result at Charlotte, he has moved up with an AFP of 24.4 and is tied with Daniel Suarez. Replacing Keselowski in 2nd from last is Bubba Wallace. who has crashed and had 3 consecutive DNFs with finishes of 33rd or worse. And now let's take a look at this week's race progression graphs. And we'll start with our top 5 finishers. There are 2 names who we have not seen in the top 5 all season. We just talked about Brad, who finished 5th, and AJ Allmendinger, who finished 4th. And now let's take a look at the 3 powerhouse organizations, starting with Hendrick Motorsports. And as you can see in that graph, William Byron was Mr. Consistency and led a race-high 283 laps and swept the first 3 stages, but came up just short and finished 2nd behind Chastain. Chase Elliott had a solid day, staying inside the top 10 for most of it and finishing 6th. Alex Bowman and Kyle Larson both had days they would just as soon forget. At JGR, we already showed Chase Briscoe finished inside the top 5. He was followed by Christopher Bell, who finished 8th. Denny Hamlin, as we know, battled with William Byron in those 3rd and 4th stages and appeared to be in line for a shot at the victory until his fueling issues on pit road. Ty Gibbs had an up and down day and finished 24th. And I think we've all heard over the last few days how much Penske struggled at Charlotte. I think due in large part to Roger Penske putting his teams on notice to avoid any potential issues and penalties after last week's big news with IndyCar. The results reflect that. Josh Berry was the only car who ran inside the top 5, and it was for a brief time late in the race on lap 350. He was the only car to crack the top 10 for the entire day. Let's also take a look at Spire. And Michael McDowell had his first top 10 result of the year, finishing 7th. And you can see Carson Hocevar had a strong day going until that final stage where he was running 2nd. His engine grenaded and he finished 34th. And our last one we'll look at for the day is RFK Racing. And as you can see, Brad started back in the pack, struggled early, but when it mattered most, finished inside the top 5. Ryan Preece finished 9th and recorded his 5th top 10 for the season. And Chris Buescher finished 22nd. And finally, it's time for our last thing of the day, and it's a new feature that I'm really excited about that Joel has created, and it's called surging and sliding. Interestingly, we've talked about doing this for a while now, and it's cool that the first one we do features one of the biggest movers ever in the history of the sport, with Ross Chastain going from last to first on Sunday. The other big movers include the aforementioned Keselowski, who was the 2nd biggest mover of the day, improving by an impressive 30 spots. Keselowski's teammate Ryan Preece was the 3rd biggest mover, improving 19 spots. And there's one in there that I really think is worth noting, and that's Shane Van Gisbergen, who improved 16 spots and finished 14th for his first top 15 since COTA. Conversely, there were those who struggled and went the opposite direction. Leading the way in this dubious category is Kyle Larson, who dropped 35 spots. Jimmy Johnson was 2nd worst and dropped 23 spots, and what unfortunately has become the norm for him in the Gen 7 car. John Hunter Nemechek, Alex Bowman, and Buescher round out the top 5 in a category they don't want to be a part of. I just really love this graph because it gives you an idea of who are the guys who are on the move during the race, for better or for worse. As a reminder, you can check all of these out on stube.com. All right, guys, that's a wrap on today's episode. We covered multiple items, and I want to get your thoughts. Let's start with Elton Sawyer's remarks about horsepower. After hearing them, do you feel more hopeful that an increase in horsepower might be coming? Also, let's talk about the comments of Larry Mack and Dale Earnhardt Jr. on Prime's coverage. What did you think about America's crew chief saying comparing Prime to Fox is like comparing apples to bananas? Do you agree with him that we don't need to see the anthem and pre-race stuff and just go straight to the green flag waving when coverage starts? And we touched on the in-race tournament. Are you excited about it? And finally, let me know what you thought about our By the Numbers segment. And did you like the newest edition and the biggest movers? Thanks as always for checking out the latest video and supporting the channel. I really and truly appreciate it and hope you have a great rest of your day.